have we lost our ability to be bored? That's a question I had to ask myself a few weeks ago after I read this thought-provoking article from Cal Newport about the topic of hard work. He was detailing how he believed American students had lost their ability to be bored, which in turn meant they had lost their ability for hard work.
I tell young men, it's like find something difficult to do.
And after I read it, I thought, yeah, that's a standard discussion with the state of things nowadays, but what shocked me is that this brother wrote this article in 2009.
You need that. You're not built for comfort or pleasure.
Which made me question if he thought it was this bad in 2009 where the most high-tech phone looked like this, and I'm not even sure if online gaming was a thing. Just how bad is our tolerance for boredom nowadays, when we have 24/7 access to the most addicting pieces of technology ever created? And well, for me at least, I realized my tolerance was terrible. And so I went out of my way to change that because I want to be able to do hard work.
Get serious. That's number one. I don't know any substitute for that.
And no BS, this is one of the best productivity methods I've discovered. See, I recently fell into a cycle where I kept resisting the most important tasks I knew I needed to do. And the frustrating thing was, I actually wanted to do my work. And after procrastinating for about an hour or so and watching a couple of motivational videos, I'd eventually start into my work, which was great of course, but the actual quality of the work I was producing was terrible because I just couldn't stop my mind from wandering. And weirdly, I constantly felt as though I couldn't recall any information. Like when reading. I don't know if you can relate, but it felt like I was reading with my eyes and not my mind, if you know what I mean. Because when I would close that book, I couldn't recall a single word I read. The worst instance being when I told my friend I watched a great podcast last night and I recommend he watches it, and then when he asked me what was it about, my head went completely blank and I couldn't recall any of the information. And like I wasn't lying, I felt like it was really good. But the weird thing is, I could barely recall any of the key points they had talked about. But he said he understood because that had happened to him before. But it didn't sit right with me, and it got me thinking, this can't be right. Is everybody experiencing these same issues? And while I believe Cal Newport's fears in 2009 were actually valid, because most of us are experiencing these issues today because we have all lost our tolerance for boredom. See, over the years there's a subtle phrase I've quietly heard in the background that's now started to make sense to me. Boredom leads to greatness. And you may be like, how does that make any sense? And look, don't get it twisted. A few weeks ago I would have thought the same thing, but now I fully understand it. Take this Reddit thread for example. The story in it might be BS, I'm not sure, but the lesson I took from it was just great. The guy said he had a friend called Earl who wanted to be an amazing pianist, or pianoist, however you pronounce it. He mentioned that Earl's goal was to be able to sight read any piano piece so that he could play in public places and have people applaud. But Earl gave up after 7 lessons. Why? Because the novelty wore off. Now Earl's talking about becoming an amazing trumpeter like Louis Armstrong, but the guy noted how he suspects Earl will give up on that too. Unlike Louis Armstrong who practiced for thousands of hours, Earl gives up on things right when they get boring. Dig a little deeper, Earl has a false belief about the world. He thinks becoming a great pianist should always be fun and exciting. It should never be boring. As a result, his friend Earl bounces from one aspiration to the next, and you could really say that that's a false belief most of us have. Chris Williamson literally said a stat like 90% of people who start making podcasts don't make it past episode 3. And of the 90% that do, 90% of them don't make it past episode 20. So by making just 21 podcast episodes, you are literally in the top 1% of all podcasters ever. Crazy stat, right? And like most of us, that's the thing Earl didn't understand. He didn't understand that in order to be exceptional at anything and really master any skill, you need to develop a tolerance for boredom. Because yeah, constantly working on the same skills can be boring, but it's what allows you to become a master of your craft. And see, what I've learned is that boredom is actually a really interesting phenomenon. Cal Newport's article compared it to hunger. And I'm not gonna lie, he was kinda onto something. Because think about it. You don't feel hunger when you're satiated, but the feeling slowly grows ravenous until you're motivated enough to take action in order to get rid of this horrible feeling. And most of the time, our hunger in terms of boredom is relieved through cheap dopamine. And while it may temporarily fix our boredom, it creates a much bigger problem. And that's that it completely strips us of our ability to be bored. And when we're stripped of this ability, I've come to realize that we also get stripped of our potential. That biological urge to take control of your life and achieve your goals gets relieved by a meaningless drip feed of artificial dopamine. And not only do these easy pleasures completely destroy our motivation to do hard things, but from actually letting myself be bored over these last few weeks, I've came to the realization that if we're always listening to podcasts and music in the background, our brains never actually get a chance to think and digest our own thoughts. Basically meaning, we don't allow ourselves to figure out our real passions and goals and really see the depth of our potential. And think about the things we admire, like the exceptional art that just sits in your mind for days inspiring you, the exceptional inventions, discoveries and mastery of skills. These are all things that were only able to come about because these people were willing to sit with their own thoughts and allow their boredom to lead to creativity. So after listening to all of that, you may be thinking, so what is the solution to all of this? And well, look, it's actually pretty simple. Set scheduled periods of boredom. And I've started to do this over the last few weeks, and it actually feels kind of weird because it now doesn't feel that hard to go and start into my difficult tasks. And see, that's because scheduled periods of boredom are basically the same thing as dopamine detoxing. On Andrew Huberman's in-depth podcast on dopamine, he says dopamine often gets misunderstood as the reward hormone, when in reality, it's our motivation hormone. Essentially, our brains produce dopamine when we are presented with the opportunity to get something we want. He also mentioned that dopamine is a limited resource that we only have a certain amount of each day. So if you overexpose yourself to too much dopamine at one time, scrolling on TikTok for 30 minutes, well then you basically have less dopamine available, explaining the reason why you feel unmotivated. Because don't you find that when you consume way too much content, your mind feels kind of weird or something? Like I find I'm far more irritable and impatient with everything when I let myself slip into bad habits like that. And I mean, this whole thing is pretty self-explanatory. When you cut away all of the novel stimuli and break free from the distractions, what are you really left with to do? Pretty much nothing, right? So if that's the case, don't you see how it would make sense that it becomes so much easier to do hard tasks? Because I know personally, I'd far rather do something even if it's hard than just sit there looking out the window doing nothing. And look, here's a really interesting test to do on yourself. Next time you end up scrolling through Reels or TikTok, allow yourself to do it, but at the end of that session, ask yourself to recall literally just 3 of the videos that you watched. And I guarantee you'll struggle to do it. And then you'll come to the realization of just how pointless it all is. And let me be real, I never expected myself to sound like Boredom's promotional team, and I'm not trying to. I really still hate boredom, but the thing is, it works. It's probably why you could argue that older generations had a far better work ethic than us, because they actually had to go out and get dopamine through the ways we were meant to, and that way it wasn't lying on the bed sideways flicking through a screen. And how I've actually implemented scheduled boredom is by just not listening to anything when going for walks, and many of you may think I'm a psycho for this, but over the last few weeks, I've not watched anything while eating, because I just know from past evidence that when I watch something, it makes it 10 times harder for me to get back into my work. And I found that when I sit there and allow myself to be bored, it makes me actually want to be productive. And that's the point of boredom I missed for so long. I missed the point that boredom can actually be a positive thing. And I think it's honestly one of the best things you can do for yourself. Because nearing the end of Cal Newport's 2009 article, he said exceptional things, be it ideas, writing, mathematics, or art, all require hard work. This in turn requires boring stretches during which you ignore a mind pleading with you to seek novel stimuli. And I've realized he couldn't be more right. Because like I'm sure Kobe found getting up at 4 AM every day to drill 1,000 shots or whatever boring, but he did it. I'm sure Goggins found waking up every morning to go run and lose weight to be a Navy SEAL repetitive, but he continued to do it. And surely someone like Thomas Edison found repetitively failing over 1,000 times to create a light bulb boring at a stage. But what did he do? He kept on persisting, because it's through consistently repeating the boring daily work you don't want to do at times that greatness can be attained. And that was the main concern of Cal Newport in his 2009 article. Like, he rounded off his writing with a line I just thought was epic. He said, "If our generation loses its tolerance for boredom, will we lose our ability to create things of exceptional quality?" And look, while his concerns were certainly justified, he forgot one critical point. He forgot there are those of us out there who are willing to push past our limitations to succeed. He forgot there are those of us out there who are willing to discipline ourselves and avoid cheap pleasures because we'd rather use that energy to smash our goals. And hey, maybe I'm deeping this whole boredom thing way too much. Like, who knows, maybe in some weird way my mind pushed me to make a video on boredom because I was so bored. But then again, maybe I'm not, and maybe, just maybe, you might level up. Through hard work we grow. Peace.